And welcome back to the Marlborough station. And of course, it is Transport Month in South Africa. That's October. And throughout the month, of course, we will be focusing on various entities as we look at the transport system in South Africa, how effective it is or perhaps not. And of course, who's doing what? So today it is the Gautrain in the spotlight. And we've been hopping on and off since this morning. You saw the interview that I did with William Dax. And of course, we continue to unpack some of the issues around this particular entity. And just, out of interest's sake, William was speaking earlier, talking about the expanse of this particular entity, around 160 kilometers per hour. We told you is the maximum speed that train can reach. And I see someone sent a tweet saying, that's slow. I don't know. It was pretty fast for us. We even lost the signal. But of course, this is what we're talking about. And looking at the stations, we are now at the Marlborough station. The next station is the Gautrain, if you go on the line that we've been traveling on. The Sandton station. And that Sandton station is actually 15 floors below the road level. That's how deep it is. And if you think about that, and as you move along, you look at the network and the construction that has taken place around that. But a lot said, and we will be getting into some of the questions that you've put as well. But let's just get back, as it were, to some of the issues here at the Gautrain. And I'm joined right now as we get into the discussions by, unfortunately, I had said earlier, the MEC would join us. She's unable to. So she has sent in her stead Mr. Dr. Thulane Mdatane, the head of department of the Gauteng Roads and Transport Department. And we're also joined by Mr. Tsepo Khobe, who's the Gautrain Management Agency COO. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming through, and thanks for engaging us here this morning.
Good morning, Sakina, and all the listeners.
So let's just get straight into it. Let me start with you, Dr. Mdatane. So there's a lot of criticism around the Gautrain and the cost to the taxpayer. How do you justify that as the Gauteng government?
My view in the view of the province is a very clear one, that Gautrain is a strategic asset of the province. At the end of this current concession, we'll be able to hand over to the Gauteng government an asset of 45 billion rand. It means the Gauteng province would be now owning that asset. And this is asset that has contributed vastly around issues of economic spin-offs to the province and job creation. A number of jobs created, over 61,000 indirect jobs were created, and over 10,000 jobs directly were created as part of this. And Gautrain contribute over 61 billion rand to national GDP in the country. So to say that it's expensive, yes, it would continue to be expensive because it's because of the amount of the technology you are putting in, the amount of efficiency and punctuality that you are putting in, and therefore through that we have got to factor in as part of the cost contribution. But however, what we have done is to ensure that in responding to the Premier call, is to ensure that as part of the new concession and the new expansion, we go towards the township areas to ensure that it's beyond just Alexandra connection, but other townships in the province become part of the connection. And there is a roadmap towards that, so that the first concession, which is currently coming to an end by March 2026, was more of an initial phase of the concession. As we move towards the second phase, we are now saying how to expand it to low-income communities and also to our township communities.
And that is, of course, the nub of the matter, because in as much as you invoke Alexandra, the reality is that most people from Alexandra don't actually use the Gautrain. And this is part of the criticism that the Gautrain, for what it costs, actually serves a minority.
Not necessarily. Remember, we are saying that part of the initial concession was that the current concession is a privately owned concession, in the sense that the partner, which is Bombela, takes on the price arrangement, the price strategy. But the new model coming in, the new concession, government is going to decide on the price strategy, and government would look at a revised adjustment price to to accommodate the low income. Because now, as I'm saying, the government will now be the owner of this 45 billion rand asset. And there's some level of maneuvering and flexibility as we continue to own this asset.
And we'll come back to that because that's an important factor. Mr. Khobe, and a factor that you, of course, have to deal with as well as looking at the integration. And there are, of course, buses, there are taxis. And one of the questions I had was, given the location of this station in particular, whether there is any sort of synergy with the community around so that you ensure that there's no disruption to the services of Gautrain.
Sakina, thank you for having me, first of all. And I think this is one of those stations that we're very proud of. If you go downstairs, so this station here, we've never run buses on it. From day one, we actually operated the distribution and feeder services through the taxi industry. We've celebrated 10 years of partnership since we started the system together with the Alexandra Taxi Association and the Alexandra Midrand and Randburg Taxi Association, which then formed a cooperative called ATS, Alexandra Taxi Services. And they've been operating as a business, a very fully functional and profitable business for close on to 10 years now. And yes, it hasn't been simple. We have had to work with each other through the ups and downs and make sure that we transform the industry as a whole. And I think sometimes when we discuss the cost of the Gautrain, the transformative nature of what the Gautrain actually lends itself to do, we tend to sidestep it. And the truth is, we've actually achieved a whole lot more. This system at the current moment carries over 70,000 people. And the beauty with it is what has happened now, it has transferred itself from being just what services the Gautrain. So only out of that 70,000, only 33% actually takes the train. The rest of it has become local transport. So people coming from Batlu and Kelvin and going out to Greenstone have no ability of being able to, there's no transport that runs directly there. So what they do is they come from their houses to here, and then they take a second shuttle out to to business areas out in, and that to us, it's a beautiful model that tells us that we are now lending ourselves beyond us just being about the Gautrain system, and now making sure that we're actually transforming the landscape of transport as a whole.
Transforming it for whom, though, at the moment, and at what cost?
Yes.
Because if we look at the ballooning patronage guarantees, those are eye-watering amounts of money. And then the question is, for whom? For whose benefit?
And maybe if I could take that one, and it is important that, what do they call it? The question I could retort back to you, against what reference? We must never ever make the mistake of underfunded systems being compared to rightly funded systems that actually make sure. So remember, we're also the only railway system at the current moment that did not suffer any damage during COVID, that did not suffer any challenges with security during COVID, because we are rightly funded. And I need us to sometimes be careful with, what do they call it, with the discussion about us saying, well, it is, what do they call it, it is expensive. Expensive pegged against what number and across, what do they call it. And remember, most of that money actually goes to servicing a subsidy that goes towards the passenger more than anything else. Systems like this, if you were to charge the true price of what it costs to operate it, you would have to probably be at double the price of the ticket at the current moment. So it is actually at half of that. Now, you would have to think through, are we funding PRASA or any other system the right way? Where does the damage come from? And therefore, can we talk about the lack of funding on the other side, rather than talking about how this is expensive? And let's change the narrative. And that is much more an important conversation that we now need to take forward. The one that we need to champion. Yes, the one that we need to champion.
Those are fair points.
But I just want to contribute, Sakina, as well. The issue that South African people of Gauteng have also benefited from this concession directly and indirectly. One of that is that the skills development, over 38 million rand has been spent towards SMME development and 61 million rand towards entrepreneurs through the Gauteng province. And the Gautrain program. And therefore, there is a direct and social investment program that has benefited through this intervention by government. But as well, as Tsepes is indicating, if we look at the tax industry, somehow the Gautrain is assisting government, and this is largely going to help South Africa at the end, because we want to formalize the taxi industry. And we are saying if we were to realize a one-ticketing system in the province, and we've got to start with the tax industry, because that's where issues of non-formalization and non-regulations are currently happening. And this pilot run by Gautrain is assisting us to bring on board the tax industry, to be a participant and a strategic participant directly to the affairs of one, in their own industry, as tax industry, but secondly, how to ensure that they move and migrate towards a fourth and a fifth industrialization program as tax industry. And Gautrain is assisting in that area.
And I take all of those points,
Yes.
I take the contribution of the taxi industry and what needs to happen in that regard. But I want to come back to the numbers.
Yes.
Because we live in a country that is said to be developmental in its outlook. We live in a country that unfortunately is poor. We're in a country where the fiscal outlook is not a positive one. And when you look at the numbers, in as much as your arguments are valid in terms of how other modes of transport, public transport perhaps, are not properly funded, it doesn't take away that even this needs to make sense. And are you saying, though, in both of your responses, that the argument that this particular mode of transport services a minority of South Africans is not a valid one?
Okay. Can I start there?
Yes.
If government does not react to the realities, government will find itself to a very problematic situation. More than 40% currently of passengers are using private transport, and that is locking our road industry. And therefore, the alternative is that through our national rail policy, is that if we are not doing any intervention, Gauteng as a province, we are landlocked. And therefore, we are not able to expand any future roads. One, the current roads, they are already...
That is okay, and I get all of that.
And therefore, the intervention is that rail becomes the only option available.
We agree.
And
one of the options. We agree to that.
Yes.
However, can you stand there, Mr. Khobe, and, with all sincerity say that this is true value for money for the South African taxpayer? Because do you have enough riders on these trains to justify those guarantees that the government has to pay? And as the government, are you not funding the shortfall for the lack of riders on the Gautrain?
No, Sakina, I think what do they call it? We also have to be careful with this one again. You have to be comfortable. Congestion is a middle class problem.
Yes.
And if you do not resolve the issues, so if transport has to always be pegged in such a way that it doesn't resolve that tier, the tier that the HOD was speaking about, the one that goes into their cars and clogs up the freeway, where we cannot move other goods and we cannot move any other. In actual fact, if you do not resolve the middle class problem, you are actually getting the same people that you are trying to saying, okay, we should be saving that load, is you need to get the middle class into
you are
public
correct,
transport.
but are you getting the middle class to use the Gautrain in the sort of numbers that would be effective for the sort of spend that we are making?
Let's talk the numbers. Talk the numbers. So pre-COVID, we were doing, close on to 57,000 passenger trips a day. And that means to you probably about 35,000 cars that have actually physically been taken off that freeway. And in actual fact, what happened was that when we had a strike a few years back, I was standing in a supermarket, and somebody was complaining that the people who ride the Gauteng, they must actually go back there because the roads are not usable in Gauteng. And it is the impact that you have to see that in actual fact, the benefit is much greater to to the greater society and to to the economy of Gauteng when the traffic moves. When I do a lot of the talks that I do when I in conferences, I speak about a thing called the heart attack slide. It shows you what will happen in in 2025. In 2025, this whole province will grind down to 26 kilometers an hour. The whole province. And I mean on the main byways that we have. In 2037, it will grind down to 10 kilometers an hour. I run faster than that. It would be easier for me to run to work. Now, if we can always be able to think about the things that have to be done today, and then simply that's expensive, we're not going to do that, and therefore we will allow ourselves to gradually go into a non-functional province, because we end up in a dysfunctional province if we continue in the route that we already
Mr. Yeah, the argument is, are we getting a good return on investment as taxpayers with regard to Gautrain? Nobody is questioning the fact that this entity is a beautiful one, it is pristine, it runs beautifully, it is effective. Nobody's questioning that. We give you that. We are questioning whether it is a good return on investment for the taxpayers of this province. And let me come to you on the money at the Gauteng province pays, Dr. Mtatane. When it was launched in 2010, Mbombela concession enjoyed patronage guarantee of 360 million. 2021, Gauteng Management Agency, through funding from Gauteng provincial government, that concession patronage went up to just over 2 billion. Then 2020, you can run through the numbers. How much have we paid overall in terms of these guarantees for the concession?
The performance guarantees that we are currently making, it's about 2 billion rand per annum. I just want to indicate this, as I've said earlier on, that we accept that the phase one of the current concession, it's more of economic spin-off as part of economic developments. The infrastructure being set up, the asset being developed and ready for us, smart trains and all of that. As we move towards the next phase, the biasness will be towards the social impact, your social indicators. How to ensure that people of township areas are also benefiting as part of that contribution. How do you ensure that we reduce carbon emission and so forth? Those are the kind of targets that we've got to deal with as we move towards the next phase.
So in simple terms, it's going to get cheaper.
It will get, but we are going, the plan is very clear. We are making Gautrain in phase 2 a self-efficient generating entity. Government is going to reduce the current patronage from 2 billion rand towards 1.5 gradually as we move towards the next 15 years to a lower amount. And because what we have done, there are a number of commercialization strategies that Gautrain has also put in place to ensure that they are able to generate their own income through, for example, the stations, how to make the stations more economic friendly, how to make them as multi-purpose centers, how to make somebody that gets into this Alexander train to have a shop, to have a haircut, to have other alternative business transactions in one place, in one center. That will help Gautrain to generate further income. And in that, indirectly, government will reduce then the patronage fee. That is in the roadmap.
So I think you get the sense, you get the gist of what it is about, Africa's first rapid rail system, the Gautrain. And it is a sense of pride, but of course we have to ask the questions as well around it. But as you heard from the HOD, the costs will come down. And you heard from Gauteng agency as well, that there will be an expansion. That is already at an advanced stage of planning. So it's going to go through the Randburg, moving towards the Soweto area, and the cost will come down. This concession for Mbombela will be running until 2026. So that's it for now. From here, we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more later on. But for now, from the Marlborough station at the Gautrain station, as I said, Africa's first rapid rail system, it's back to studio.